I am Joshua, 34, and my own father turned my 5-year-old son away on the street right after an earthquake destroyed our home. Before I tell you about how a hidden box and a lawyer completely destroyed his perfect life, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The dust was still clinging to my son's hair, coating his small shoulders like a layer of dirty snow. Isaac stood in the gravel driveway, his tiny fingers wrapped so tightly around the worn ear of his stuffed bear, Biscuit, that his knuckles were completely white. The streetlights of my father's upscale suburban neighborhood flickered on one by one, casting long, sharp shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn. I looked up at the massive 4-bedroom house. I looked at the expansive 3-car garage where my half-brother Julian's gleaming sports car usually sat. Then I looked at my father, Robert. He stood on the grand front porch, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, blocking the custom mahogany doorway like a bouncer at an exclusive nightclub. He was wearing a freshly pressed cashmere sweater. I was wearing hospital scrubs covered in drywall dust. "You can stay, Joshua," Robert said. His voice was entirely flat, completely devoid of any paternal warmth or basic human empathy. "But Catherine says there's no room for the boy. Julian needs the game room for his streaming setup, and Catherine uses the guest room for her morning Pilates. You know how it is. The house is just tight right now." I stared at him. I literally stopped breathing for a second. The air in my lungs turned to heavy lead. I looked down at Isaac. My 5-year-old son was looking up at his grandfather with wide, exhausted, terrified eyes. Isaac didn't cry. He didn't throw a tantrum. He just gripped his bear tighter and stepped slightly behind my right leg, seeking shelter from the man who was supposed to be his family. From deep inside the brightly lit house, I heard Catherine's voice echoing down the hallway. "Just tell him the kid can stay with a friend, Robert. It's not our problem." My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. A thick vein throbbed against my temple. This was my flesh and blood. This was the man who was supposed to protect us when the world fell apart. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. Pleading with Robert was like pouring water into a bottomless pit. It would only give him the satisfaction of seeing me desperate. I simply looked him dead in the eye, adjusted the heavy grip on my duffel bag, and said a single word. "Noted." I turned around, picked Isaac up in my arms, and walked back to my beat-up sedan parked on the curb. I buckled my son into his car seat, making sure the straps were secure across his chest. I didn't look back at the house. I put the car in drive and pulled away into the dark street. At that exact moment, I still didn't know the darkest secret Robert was hiding behind those mahogany doors. I didn't know that the very ground he was standing on belonged to me. Let me take you back a few hours to show you exactly how we ended up standing in that driveway. It was a Tuesday, 2:47 p.m. I had just gotten off a brutal 12-hour night shift as an ER nurse. It was the kind of grueling shift where your scrubs smell like bleach, sweat, and absolute panic, and your feet feel like they've been beaten with heavy hammers. I had finally picked Isaac up from his daycare center, brought him back to our cramped second-floor apartment in Midtown Sacramento, and made him a simple grilled cheese sandwich for a late lunch. I was standing at the kitchen sink, washing a single ceramic plate, when the floor suddenly dropped beneath my feet. It didn't just shake. It shifted violently, like the earth itself was trying to throw us off. The sound came first, a deep, guttural, terrifying roar from beneath the concrete foundation, sounding exactly like a runaway freight train crashing through our basement. The wooden kitchen cabinets slammed open. Glass cups and ceramic plates launched out, shattering into hundreds of jagged pieces against the cheap linoleum floor. "Dad!" Isaac screamed, his voice piercing through the rumble. I dropped the plate, dove across the shaking kitchen floor, grabbed Isaac firmly by the waist, and dragged him violently under the solid oak dining table. I curled my entire body over his, pressing his face deep into my chest to protect his eyes and lungs. The building groaned a horrible, agonizing sound. Chunks of white plaster rained down hard on my back and shoulders. I could feel Isaac's tiny heart hammering fiercely against my ribs, fast and frantic like a small bird trapped inside a paper bag. The violent, earth-shattering shaking lasted for 12 endless seconds. Every single second felt like an hour. When it finally stopped, a thick, suffocating cloud of white drywall dust hung heavily in the air. I coughed, pulling Isaac out from under the table. The load-bearing wall in our narrow hallway was split wide open. A jagged, dark crack ran all the way from the ceiling straight down to the warped floorboards. Water hissed violently from a busted copper pipe hidden inside the wall, spraying across the carpet. 2 hours later, the city structural inspector stood in the middle of my ruined living room holding a clipboard. He didn't even look apologetic. He just slapped a bright red, terrifying tag directly on the front door. Structure is severely compromised. Everyone out. You can't stay here tonight. It's too dangerous. Just like that, we were entirely homeless. The panic set in. As a single father, my biggest fear was losing custody if child services ever thought I couldn't provide a safe home. I scrambled around the broken glass, grabbed a canvas duffel bag, and aggressively threw in Isaac's pajamas, a few changes of work clothes, his toothbrush, and his stuffed bear. I opened my banking app on my phone. I had a grand total of $800 to my name, money that was desperately supposed to go toward next month's rent. Temporary hotel housing would completely wipe that out in less than 5 days. I had absolutely no choice. I had to swallow my pride and make the call. I sat in the driver's seat of my dusty car, parked right outside the red-tagged apartment building. The hazard lights were blinking, casting a rhythmic orange glow over the dashboard. Isaac was unusually quiet in the back seat, his eyes wide and glassy as he stared out the window at our frantic neighbors carrying heavy boxes to their cars. I pulled out my phone and scrolled slowly to my father's contact name. I hovered my thumb over the green dial button. My thumb felt like it weighed 50 pounds. Robert and I didn't have a good relationship. Actually, that is a massive understatement. Ever since the ugly, bitter divorce between him and my mother decades ago, I was treated like a leftover obligation, a stain on his new, perfect life. But this was an actual emergency, a natural disaster. Surely, an earthquake would force him to bypass his petty family politics. I took a deep breath and hit call. He picked up on the fourth ring. I could distinctly hear the muted, cheerful sounds of a daytime sports game playing on his massive living room television. "Dad," I said, my voice tight and strained. "There was an earthquake over here. Our entire building got red-tagged. The city inspector kicked everyone out onto the street. Isaac and I need a place to crash for just a few days until I can figure out a deposit for a new place." Complete silence on the line. Then I heard him sigh. It was the specific, heavy sigh he always used when I was being a massive inconvenience to his day. "Hold on," he mumbled under his breath. I heard a muffled conversation. He had covered the receiver, but not well enough. Catherine's sharp, reedy, complaining voice cut right through the background noise. I couldn't make out every single word, but the toxic tone was unmistakable. It was pure annoyance, disgust, a complete lack of care. Then Robert came back on the line, clearing his throat. "You can come over, Joshua, but Catherine says," and that was when he delivered the killing blow. That was when he told me my innocent son wasn't welcome in his home. I hung up the phone without another word. I sat in the car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned stark white. My vision actually blurred with rage. Isaac shifted nervously in the back seat. "Dad." His tiny, fragile voice broke the heavy silence in the car. "Is Grandpa going to let us sleep at his big house? Am I too big?" That single question completely shattered my heart into a million pieces. I quickly unbuckled my seatbelt, reached back over the console, and grabbed his small, cold hand. "No, buddy. You are the perfect size. You are exactly right. We're going to Uncle Carter's house. He's making mac and cheese." I put the car in drive and drove far away from the wreckage of our apartment, completely unaware that this terrible disaster was actually the catalyst that would eventually tear Robert's entire fake empire right to the ground. Carter was my absolute best friend and a fellow trauma nurse in the ER. We had survived countless brutal, bloody shifts together, the kind where you have to rely on the person next to you to keep a patient breathing. When I finally pulled up to his small, modest bungalow on the east side of town, he was already standing on the front porch waiting for us. I didn't even have to explain the situation over the phone. He took one look at the thick layer of plaster dust on my scrubs and the utterly exhausted, terrified look on Isaac's pale face. Carter walked straight down the wooden steps, grabbed my heavy duffel bag without asking, and patted my shoulder firmly. "Guest room is already set up. I've got hot mac and cheese on the stove for the little guy, and an ice-cold beer waiting for you on the counter." He didn't ask a single probing question. He didn't make me explain why my own wealthy, successful father had turned me away in a crisis. Carter just opened his front door and let us inside. The contrast was staggering. The safety and warmth of this friend's house stood in complete opposition to the cold rejection of my own flesh and blood. Within 30 minutes, Isaac had eaten a full bowl of food and was fast asleep in the guest bed, clutching biscuit tightly against his chest, completely exhausted from the sheer trauma of the day. I sat heavily on Carter's worn-out living room couch, staring blankly at the condensation dripping down the side of my glass beer bottle. Carter sat across from me in his recliner, quietly eating a slice of leftover pizza. "He really looked at that kid and said no to his own grandson?" Carter finally asked, his voice low and thick with disgust. "He said Catherine didn't want him there?" I replied, the bitter taste of betrayal coating my tongue like ash. "He said Julian needed the game room for his video games." Carter scoffed loudly, shaking his head in disbelief. "Your family is a real piece of work, man. A truly toxic piece of work." I thanked him again for his hospitality and headed quietly into the guest room. I lay down on the hard floor right next to Isaac's bed, using a rolled-up bath towel as a makeshift pillow. The room was completely dark, silent except for the soft, rhythmic breathing of my sleeping son. But my mind was screaming. The adrenaline from the violent earthquake was slowly fading from my bloodstream, replaced entirely by a cold, hard, calculating anger. Lying there on the floor, staring up at the dark ceiling, the bitter memories started playing in my head like a cruel, unavoidable movie. I had spent my entire life standing entirely in the shadow of Julian, my younger half-brother. Julian was the ultimate golden child. He was Catherine's biological son, the prince of the household. From the exact day Julian was born, I became an invisible, unwanted ghost in my own family. I remembered the dark, rainy day of my mother's funeral. I was 12 years old, standing by the grave entirely alone. Robert didn't even hold my hand. I remembered trying to scrape together money for a college fund a few years later. I worked 3 exhausting jobs, flipping greasy burgers at a fast food joint, stocking heavy shelves at a grocery store at midnight, and cleaning up a local gym before dawn, just to afford my nursing degree. I had absolutely zero financial help. Robert looked me in the eye and told me that building character through grueling hard work was the best gift a father could ever give a son. But when Julian barely graduated from a mediocre, overpriced private college with a degree in something utterly useless, Robert bought him a brand new silver Porsche. I literally stood there in the driveway, wearing my faded blue hospital scrubs, and watched Robert proudly hand the shiny keys to Julian. There was a massive red bow on the hood of the car. I was holding a cheap congratulatory card I had bought at a dollar store. The hypocrisy was sickening. My nursing salary was decent, especially after a recent promotion to shift lead, but paying off my massive student loans and raising Isaac entirely alone meant I was always living paycheck to paycheck, counting every single dollar. Meanwhile, Julian lived completely rent-free in a luxury downtown apartment that Robert owned. He spent his days trading volatile crypto stocks and posting obnoxious photos of luxury watches on social media. I had always accepted this painful dynamic. I had successfully convinced myself that I was the strong one, the independent one who didn't need their toxic money. But tonight, seeing my innocent son brutally rejected from their home, something deep inside my chest finally snapped. The long-held illusion broke into pieces. This wasn't about building character. This was about deliberate erasure. Robert didn't just favor Julian. He actively despised my existence because I looked like my mother, the woman who had dared to demand a divorce when she realized what a monster he truly was. It was 2 a.m. Couldn't sleep. My eyes were wide open in the suffocating darkness of the room. I sat up slowly, making sure not to wake Isaac. The guest room Carter gave us doubled as his extra storage room. Stacked haphazardly in the far corner were a few heavy cardboard boxes I had asked Carter to hold on to for me a few years ago when I had to downsize to a smaller, cheaper apartment. One of the boxes was sealed tightly with brittle, yellowing packing tape that had started to peel at the edges. Written on the side of the cardboard in thick black marker were 3 simple words: Mom's things. After my mother died in that tragic car accident, Robert packed up her entire life in less than 2 days. He shoved all her precious memories into boxes and threw them into the dark attic like garbage. After the funeral, he aggressively forbade anyone from mentioning her name again. Exactly 1 year later, Catherine moved her designer luggage into the master bedroom. I crept silently over to the box, trying not to make a single sound on the floorboards. I pulled out my pocket knife, flipped open the blade, and sliced cleanly through the old tape. The distinct smell of aged paper and dried lavender drifted out into the room. It was a specific, comforting smell I hadn't encountered in decades. It immediately brought a painful lump to my throat. Inside the box were a few faded photo albums, a pair of her tortoiseshell reading glasses, and a thick stack of old utility bills bound by a rubber band. I started sifting carefully through the papers, my hands trembling slightly in the dark. Near the very bottom, buried safely beneath a thick, folded wool sweater, was a large, heavy manila envelope. I pulled it out. The return address printed in the top left corner immediately caught my eye. It was from Tucson, Arizona. The name written clearly above the address made my heart skip a violent beat. Martha Hayes, my grandmother, my mother's mother. Robert had told me years ago, with a very serious look on his face, that Grandma Martha had suffered a severe, debilitating stroke. He said she had developed severe dementia, didn't remember anyone's face anymore, and was placed permanently in a state-run medical facility. He insisted that visiting her would only cause me unnecessary psychological pain. I was just a naive teenager. I trusted him. I believed his lie. The envelope was officially postmarked October 2003. I carefully opened the metal clasp and pulled out the contents. There was a single letter written on delicate lavender stationery, and a thick, heavy stack of legal documents firmly stapled together. I unfolded the letter. The handwriting was elegant, beautiful, and completely steady. My dearest Joshua, the letter began, the ink still vibrant against the paper. If you are reading this, I hope you are well and happy. Your mother always wanted to make absolutely sure you were taken care of in this world. Before she passed away, we made a solemn promise to each other. I have created a secure trust for you. It is called the Hayes Family Legacy Trust. It includes the family house on Burwood Street and exactly $210,000 in a secure, high-yield savings account. This is your rightful inheritance, Joshua. When you turn 25 years old, everything in this trust becomes legally yours. I love you, my brave, wonderful boy. Never let anyone in that house make you feel small. Love always, Grandma Martha. I stopped reading. I blinked hard, aggressively rubbing my eyes, staring at the specific numbers written clearly in blue ink. $210,000. And an entire house. My lungs completely stopped working. I couldn't pull in a single breath of air. I quickly looked at the dense legal documents stacked beneath the letter. It was a highly official, notarized declaration of trust. I flipped frantically through the dense, confusing legal jargon until I finally found the designated beneficiary page. Sole beneficiary Joshua Hayes. Then, my eyes darted down to see the name listed under the trustee section. The specific person legally responsible for managing the money and maintaining the property until I turned 25. Trustee Robert Hayes. I turned 25 exactly 9 years ago. I had never seen a single solitary dime of this massive amount of money. I had never been handed a shiny brass key to any house on Burwood Street. Instead, I had taken out massive, crippling student loans that I was still paying off. I had struggled terrifyingly to buy expensive baby formula for Isaac when he was just an infant. I had eaten cheap ramen noodles for weeks straight just to make sure I could pay my rent on time. And all along, for all those years of desperate struggling, there was a trust fund. A massive, life-changing inheritance. Managed entirely by the very man who just looked down his nose and told my 5-year-old son to sleep on the street. My hands began to violently shake. Not out of sadness. Not out of shock. Out of pure, unadulterated, blinding rage. I carefully set the fragile papers down on the carpet. I needed hard facts. I needed irrefutable evidence. I aggressively pulled my laptop out of my duffel bag and opened it right there on the floor, the bright white screen harshly illuminating the dark corners of the room. I quickly connected to Carter's Wi-Fi network. My fingers flew across the keyboard like lightning. I went straight to the official Sacramento County Assessor's public property database. I typed the address directly into the search bar, 412 Burwood Street. The detailed property records loaded instantly. Built in 1978. 3 bedrooms, 2 updated baths. I scrolled rapidly down to the transaction and ownership history. My eyes immediately locked onto a legally recorded transfer dated March 14, 2018. That was the exact year I turned 26. Document type: quitclaim deed. Grantor: Hayes Family Legacy Trust. Grantee: Robert Hayes and Catherine Hayes. Sale price: $0. $0. A completely free, uncompensated transfer of massive wealth. I knew enough about the law to know that a quitclaim deed is a legal document used to rapidly transfer interest in real estate. But for a trust to legally transfer property directly to the trustee personally, the named beneficiary, which was me, would have had to explicitly sign off on it in front of a licensed witness. I quickly downloaded the PDF image of the original scanned deed. I scrolled anxiously to the final signature page. There, at the very bottom right corner, was my name, Joshua Hayes, signed boldly in black ink, officially notarized with a state stamp by a woman named Evelyn Vance. I stared intensely at the signature. It wasn't mine. It wasn't even close. The loop on the J was entirely wrong, curving in a way I never wrote it. The slant of the letters was far too aggressive. Someone had clearly tried to forge my handwriting by looking at an old document, and they had done a decent job at a quick glance, but I sign hundreds of complicated medical charts every single week. I know the exact biomechanics of my own signature. They stole it. Robert and Catherine literally, brazenly stole my inheritance. They forged my legal name, took the valuable house out of the trust, sold it a year later in a booming market for a massive, untaxed profit, and pocketed every single dollar of the cash. And the $210,000 from the savings account? I immediately thought of Julian's brand new silver Porsche. I thought of Catherine's sudden, ridiculously expensive kitchen remodel featuring imported Italian marble countertops. It all made sickening, horrifying sense now. They had literally built their luxurious, comfortable life standing directly on the money my grandmother had saved to protect me. It was 4 a.m. now. I didn't care about the time. I needed to know the absolute rest of the truth. I opened a new tab and searched my grandmother's full name, Martha Hayes, Tucson, Arizona. If Robert lied so easily about the massive amount of money, he absolutely lied about her medical condition. The search results quickly brought up a digital copy of a local community newsletter from a sunny retirement village in Tucson, dated just 3 months ago. There was a full-color picture. It was Grandma Martha. She looked older, her hair completely snow-white now, but she was standing perfectly straight, smiling warmly, and holding a beautiful glass plaque for organizing a massive community garden project. No dementia, no stroke, no depressing state-run medical facility. I found the main administrative phone number for the retirement village. I sat on the floor and waited for exactly 4 agonizing hours. At exactly 8:01 a.m., I stepped quietly out onto Carter's wooden back porch into the crisp, cold morning air and dialed the Arizona number. I asked the cheerful receptionist to please connect me to Martha Hayes' private room. The line clicked. It rang twice. Hello. The voice was frail, slightly raspy, but incredibly clear and sharp. Grandma! My voice cracked instantly. Couldn't stop it. The emotional weight of the last 24 hours crushed me. It's Joshua. There was absolute, heavy silence on the line. For 5 agonizing seconds, I heard nothing but the faint, shaky sound of her breathing. Then, a sharp, sudden gasp. Joshua? My Joshua! She started crying. The raw, guttural sound of her weeping completely broke me. I pressed my back hard against the wooden siding of Carter's house, tilted my head back to the sky, and wiped a hot tear from my own cheek. I'm here, Grandma. I'm so sorry I haven't called you. Dad told me you were sick. He told me you hated me. She wept, her voice trembling violently with decades of cruel, suppressed pain. He told me you never wanted to speak to my side of the family ever again after the ugly divorce. I wrote to you, Joshua. I wrote to you every single Christmas for 22 years. Every single letter came back to my mailbox. Return to sender. Your father wrote it on the envelopes himself. He intercepted the mail. He systematically and intentionally cut me off from the only family member who actually genuinely loved me, just to control the narrative and successfully hide the trust fund money. Grandma, I said, my voice dropping an entire octave, solidifying into absolute steel. Dad stole the trust. He forged my signature on legal documents and took the Burwood house. He took everything. The crying stopped instantly. The deep sorrow in her voice vanished in a split second, replaced immediately by the cold, hard, terrifying fury of a mother who realizes her beloved child has been deeply wronged. Then we are going to burn his entire fake life down to the ground, Joshua, Grandma Martha said, her voice dripping with venom. Every cent, every brick. Call a lawyer right now. Carter knew a guy. Working in a chaotic ER, you meet absolutely everyone, from injured construction workers to high-powered corporate attorneys having panic attacks. Carter made a quick phone call, called in a massive favor, and by 1 p.m. that exact same day, I was sitting in the sleek, glass-walled, high-rise office of Anthony Mercer. Anthony was a legal bulldog in a custom-tailored Italian suit. He specialized specifically in high-stakes probate, inheritance fraud, and trust litigation. He sat silently behind his massive mahogany desk, meticulously reviewing the printouts I had brought. The 2003 lavender letter, the suspicious quitclaim deed, the county property records. He didn't speak a single word for a full 5 minutes. He just read, his eyes darting across the pages. Finally, he took off his expensive reading glasses, placed them on the desk, and looked directly at me. Your father is an arrogant, sloppy fool, Anthony said calmly, his voice full of quiet authority. He committed textbook felony fraud. As the appointed trustee, he had a strict, unbreakable fiduciary duty to you. Forging a beneficiary's signature to maliciously misappropriate trust assets is not just a civil matter where he pays a fine, Joshua. It's criminal. It carries prison time. I want absolutely everything back, I said, leaning forward in the leather chair. I want the money he stole. I want the full market value of the house. And I want him to look my son in the eye while he loses his entire empire. Anthony nodded slowly, a dangerous smile forming. Here is the strategy. We move completely silently. If Robert catches even a slight wind of this, he will immediately start hiding assets, moving cash to offshore accounts, or shredding vital documents. We have to formally request the original notarized documents from the county clerk and quietly subpoena the bank records for the trust account. But most importantly, we need to irrefutably authenticate that fake signature. He slid a thick, premium business card across the polished desk. Dr. Alan Gray, board-certified forensic document examiner. You go see Dr. Gray tomorrow morning. Give him 5 clear examples of your real signature from that specific year. Once I have his sworn legal affidavit stating that the quitclaim deed is a definitive forgery, I prepare the nuclear bomb. We don't just sue him politely. We file an aggressive petition for immediate removal of the trustee, demand full restitution with maximum interest, and officially refer the forgery to the district attorney. I felt a dark, satisfying thrill race through my exhausted veins. How long will this take? 30 days, Anthony said. Can you play nice and pretend everything is normal for 30 days? I thought about Robert standing on his porch, turning Isaac away into the cold night. I can play whatever role I need to. The next 3 weeks were a grueling masterclass in extreme psychological torture. I moved Isaac into a small, temporary, incredibly overpriced rental apartment using an emergency loan from Carter. I aggressively worked double shifts at the hospital to keep my mind busy. Every single time my phone rang and Robert's name popped up on the bright screen, I had to physically force my jaw to unclench and my muscles to relax before hitting answer. Dr. Gray, the forensic handwriting expert, was absolutely meticulous. He required irrefutable exemplars of my handwriting from the exact same year the forgery took place. I spent hours digging up old tax returns, apartment lease agreements, and signed medical logs from the hospital archives. Exactly 1 week later, Anthony called me while I was eating a sandwich in the hospital break room. It's a confirmed, undeniable forgery, Joshua. Dr. Gray's comprehensive report is totally bulletproof. The pen pressure, the stroke velocity, the terminal angles of the ink, none of it matches your biometric profile. But it gets even better. Better how? I asked, stopping my pacing and gripping the phone tightly. I ran a deep background check on Evelyn Vance, the specific notary public who stamped the quitclaim deed validating your fake signature. Guess where Evelyn works? Where? She's a senior administrative assistant at the exact same boutique real estate brokerage where Catherine used to work before she retired. She's Catherine's best friend from college. They were sorority sisters. I stopped breathing for a second. The final, missing puzzle piece clicked perfectly into place. Robert didn't act alone in a moment of panic. Catherine wasn't just a passive, innocent bystander. She was the mastermind architect. She specifically used her closest friend to illegally notarize the fraudulent document without me ever being present in the room. It was a calculated, premeditated conspiracy. They're both going down, Anthony said, his voice laced with deep professional satisfaction. The legal petition is fully drafted. The bank subpoena is ready. I just need the perfect, most impactful moment to serve him. I know exactly when, I said, looking at a digital notification that had just popped up on my phone screen. It was an obnoxious digital invitation from Catherine. A massive family dinner party to celebrate Julian's upcoming luxury vacation to Europe. I walked into Robert and Catherine's sprawling house on a Friday night. The rich, savory smell of expensive pot roast and red wine filled the air. I had strategically left Isaac with Carter for the evening. I needed to be completely unencumbered and highly focused for this performance. Julian was lounging lazily on the massive, custom leather sofa, swiping mindlessly through his phone. He looked up when I walked in, flashing a highly condescending, arrogant smirk. Hey Josh, hear about the crappy apartment situation. Tough break, man. If you need a couple $100 to tide you over, let me know. He smugly patted his designer pocket. Outside the large bay window, his gleaming silver Porsche caught the bright light from the street lamp. I looked at the expensive car. Bought entirely with my grandmother's money. Bought with my stolen future. I'm fine, Julian. Just working hard, I said, forcing a polite, tight smile. At the massive dining table, the underlying tension was thick, hiding just beneath the polite clinking of heavy silver cutlery against fine china plates. Robert sat at the absolute head of the table, cutting his meat with precise, aggressive strokes. Catherine was pouring expensive wine, her fake, overly sweet smile plastered permanently on her face. Halfway through the meal, Robert cleared his throat loudly. He looked directly at me, his eyes narrowing slightly, assessing me. So, Joshua, Robert said casually, entirely too casually, I received a very weird piece of mail the other day. Some confusing notice from a bank about an old family trust account. Did you get anything like that in the mail at your old place? My heart hammered violently against my ribs, but I utilized every ounce of my ER training to keep my face entirely blank and my heart rate steady. He was actively fishing for information. The bank must have legally notified him that official inquiries were being made regarding the trust records. He was testing me to see if I was the one pulling the invisible strings. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my ice water. I looked him dead in the eye, perfectly calm. A trust account? No, I haven't seen anything like that. Why? Did a long-lost relative leave us a massive fortune? I let out a dry, self-deprecating laugh. Catherine let out a massive breath she was obviously holding. Robert's rigid shoulders relaxed visibly. He bought it completely. No, just stupid junk mail, Robert muttered, waving his hand dismissively in the air. Probably a phishing scam. I spent the rest of the agonizing dinner listening quietly while Julian bragged endlessly about the 5-star luxury hotels he booked in Italy. I smiled. I nodded. I ate their stolen food. I was the perfect, oblivious, subservient son. As I walked out the grand front door that night, Robert patted me condescendingly on the back. Keep your head up, Joshua. Hard work always pays off eventually. It sure does, Dad, I replied, looking directly at his Porsche. It sure does. The absolute explosion happened exactly 5 days later. Anthony officially filed the explosive petition in probate court on a crisp Tuesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, the aggressive legal notices hit Robert's mailbox. The element of surprise was complete and total. But Robert didn't call me to apologize. He didn't ask for forgiveness. Instead, he immediately deployed the family nuclear option, the vicious smear campaign. My phone started blowing up with notifications. Aggressive texts from Aunt Clara, Uncle David, and distant cousins I hadn't spoken to in over 10 years. Clara, Joshua, what is wrong with your brain? Suing your own father over some greedy delusion? Catherine is literally in tears. David, you're an absolute disgrace to this family. After everything Robert did for you, paying for your food, you try to extort him with a lawyer? Grow up and drop this. Catherine had clearly blasted a massive, tear-stained, highly fabricated narrative to the entire extended family on Facebook, painting me as a greedy, unhinged, jealous son trying to steal their hard-earned retirement money. I didn't reply to a single text. I let them talk. The louder they yelled now, the harder the public fall would be. Anthony had arranged for a highly professional private process server to deliver the official court summons for the felony forgery and fraud charges. We didn't send it to Robert's quiet office. We sent it directly to his house on Saturday afternoon. It was Julian's massive, catered birthday barbecue. 30 wealthy guests. Expensive catered food. A live acoustic band playing on the expansive stone patio. According to Aunt Clara, who later confessed this exact scene to me in absolute tears of shame, the process server walked right past the expensive balloon arch, stepped boldly onto the patio, and approached Robert right in front of his corporate boss, his wealthy neighbors, and his entire judging family. Robert Hayes? The server asked loudly, cutting right over the live music. Yes, Robert said, holding a pair of silver grilling tongs. You've been served. The server slapped the incredibly thick stack of legal documents right onto the silver platter of steaks. The band stopped playing. Julian dropped his expensive craft beer. Catherine's face drained of all human color. Robert ripped open the envelope. He saw the forensic report. He saw the terrifying words felony forgery. And he saw the mandatory court date. The lavish barbecue ended exactly 10 minutes later in total, humiliating silence. The Sacramento County Courthouse was a towering, intimidating building constructed of cold marble and heavy oak doors. I walked confidently down the echoing corridor wearing my only good, tailored suit. Anthony walked right beside me, carrying a thick leather briefcase that held the absolute destruction of Robert Hayes's life. When we entered courtroom 4B, Robert, Catherine, and Julian were already sitting rigidly at the respondents' table. They had hired an incredibly expensive defense lawyer, a guy in a flashy pinstripe suit who looked visibly nervous while flipping through his incredibly thin folder of defense documents. Robert glared at me with pure, unadulterated venom. Catherine looked down at her shaking hands. Julian just looked terrified and confused, entirely out of his depth. I sat down next to Anthony. We didn't say a single word to them. Then, The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a loud thud. The rhythmic clacking of a wooden cane echoed sharply against the floorboards. Robert turned his head to look. His jaw literally dropped open in sheer horror. It was Grandma Martha. She had flown in from Arizona the night before. She walked slowly but with immense, undeniable dignity, leaning heavily on Carter's arm for support. She held a small, worn cardboard box securely in her other hand. Robert gripped the hard edge of his table, his knuckles turning completely white. He looked like he had just seen a terrifying ghost. The malicious lie he had told for 22 years was walking right toward him in broad daylight. Martha didn't even look at him. She walked right past his table, the absolute coldness radiating off her enough to freeze the entire room, and sat in the front row directly behind me. Judge Nathan, a stern, deeply serious man with thick white hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, banged his heavy wooden gavel. All right, case number 88-42B. Petition for removal of trustee, restitution of stolen trust assets, and referral for criminal fraud. Mr. Mercer, you have the floor. Proceed. Anthony stood up smoothly, buttoned his suit jacket, and approached the wooden podium. He didn't use flowery, emotional language. He used hard, undeniable facts like a skilled surgeon uses a scalpel. Your Honor, Anthony began, projecting his clear voice across the completely silent room. We are here today because a wealthy father decided his own son's future was entirely expendable. Robert Hayes, acting as the legally appointed trustee of the Hayes Family Legacy Trust, illegally transferred valuable real estate belonging solely to the beneficiary, Joshua Hayes, directly into his own name. Anthony held up a large, undeniable display board. On the left side was an enlarged image of the fraudulent quitclaim deed. On the right side was Dr. Gray's detailed forensic analysis. He achieved this massive theft by blatantly forging his son's signature. I formally submit to the Court Exhibit A, the sworn legal affidavit of Dr. Alan Gray, a board-certified forensic document examiner, concluding with 100% scientific certainty that Joshua Hayes did not sign this document. Robert's expensive lawyer stood up quickly. Objection, Your Honor. The signature was properly and legally notarized by a state official. My client relied entirely on the validity of that notarization in good faith. That was the exact, fatal mistake Anthony was patiently waiting for. Anthony smiled a terrifying, shark-like smile. I am so incredibly glad opposing counsel brought up the notary. Let's talk about Evelyn Vance. Anthony clicked a small remote, and a new, massive slide appeared on the courtroom screen. It was a brightly colored photo pulled directly from Catherine's public Facebook page from 5 years ago. It showed Catherine and Evelyn Vance, holding large margaritas on a sunny beach, with the glaring caption, Besties for life, sorority sisters forever. Evelyn Vance, the specific state notary who verified this aggressively forged signature, is the longtime best friend of Catherine Hayes, Robert's wife. We have successfully subpoenaed Ms. Vance's electronic communications. Exhibit C contains direct text messages between Catherine Hayes and Evelyn Vance, explicitly coordinating the illegal, fraudulent notarization of the deed, while my client, Joshua Hayes, was actively working a 12-hour hospital shift miles away. Catherine gasped audibly, covering her mouth with her trembling hands. Robert turned the color of wet cement. Julian stared at his mother in absolute horrified shock. Judge Nathan slammed both his hands down hard on his high desk. He looked furiously at Robert's shrinking lawyer. Counselor, does your client have any actual defense against these text messages or this forensic report? The lawyer looked at Robert, then back to the furious judge. We request a continuance to review the evidence, Your Honor. Absolutely denied. Judge Nathan snapped, his voice booming. The judge leaned far forward, his voice dripping with utter disgust. Mr. Hayes, what you have done here today is repulsive. You maliciously stole from your own blood to fund your lifestyle. The court finds overwhelming, irrefutable evidence of severe breach of fiduciary duty and intentional fraud. The wooden gavel came down like a violent thunderclap. Robert Hayes is immediately, permanently removed as trustee. The court orders full and immediate restitution of the $210,000 cash principal, plus the full fair market value of the Burwood property at the exact time of the illegal sale, plus a 10% statutory penalty interest. Total judgment, $585,000. Payable entirely to Joshua Hayes within 90 days. Furthermore, I am officially referring this entire matter, along with the undeniable evidence of notary fraud, directly to the District Attorney's Office for immediate criminal prosecution. It was finally over. I exhaled a massive breath I felt like I had been holding for my entire adult life. I turned around in my chair and looked at Grandma Martha. Hot tears were streaming rapidly down her wrinkled face, but she was smiling the most beautiful smile I had ever seen. This is a moment that changed everything, when I finally regained control of my life. Thank you for your patience in getting this far. You are amazing. Please like the video and leave a comment with the number 1 below so I know you've been with me this far. This will not only help more people find this story, but also let me know that my experiences are meaningful to someone. Your support is my greatest motivation to continue sharing the rest of this journey. The legal fallout was immediate and absolutely catastrophic for Robert. The massive judgment of $585,000 wasn't just something he had sitting around casually in a checking account. His entire illusion of wealth was tied up completely in his oversized suburban house, Catherine's ridiculous luxury lifestyle, and Julian's expensive toys. Exactly 3 days after the brutal court ruling, my phone buzzed on the counter. I was sitting peacefully at the small kitchen table in my temporary rental, watching Isaac happily draw a picture of a house with a bright red door with his crayons. The caller ID brightly displayed one name, Robert. I let it ring 3 full times. I wanted him to actively sweat. I wanted him to feel the anxiety. Then, I swiped answer and put it calmly on speakerphone. "Hello," I said, my voice completely relaxed. "Joshua." Robert's voice was completely unrecognizable. The deep arrogance, the commanding boom, the endless condescension. It was all entirely gone. He sounded incredibly hollow. He sounded pathetic and old. "What exactly do you want, Robert?" I didn't call him Dad. I would never call him that again. "Please," he rasped, his voice actually breaking into a sob. "Please, you have to talk to your lawyer. You have to ask the judge for a longer payment plan. 90 days. I can't liquidate absolutely everything in 90 days, Joshua. The housing market is terrible right now." I sat back comfortably in my chair, slowly tracing the ceramic rim of my coffee mug. "That sounds exactly like a financial problem. Not my problem. Joshua, please listen to me," he begged, desperation leaking from every word. "Catherine is having a severe nervous breakdown. The DA investigators literally showed up at Evelyn's house yesterday to seize her computer. And Julian is crying in his room. The bank is going to aggressively repossess his Porsche tomorrow morning because we took a massive loan out against the Burwood house equity just to buy it for him. You can't ruin your brother's life over this." He was amazingly still doing it. Even now, facing absolute financial ruin and potential prison time, his main priority was protecting Julian's luxury car. His priority was Catherine's emotional comfort. I looked lovingly across the table at my son. Isaac was coloring happily, completely unaware of the desperate monster on the phone. I suddenly remembered the freezing cold rain from that night. I remembered the thick drywall dust coating my son's innocent face. I remembered the horrifying feeling of utter, paralyzing helplessness standing in that gravel driveway. "Julian's Porsche?" I repeated, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm, icy whisper. "You are seriously calling me to beg for Julian's Porsche?" "He didn't know anything about the forgery, Joshua. He's innocent. Don't maliciously punish him for my mistakes," Robert pleaded loudly. "You really want to talk about who is innocent?" I stood up slowly from the table, my voice gaining strength. My 5-year-old son was completely innocent. When our apartment was destroyed, when we had absolutely nowhere to go, you looked directly at my son and you told him to sleep on the street. You told me there was no space for my child. Absolute, dead silence on the line. I could hear his ragged, panicked breathing. You told me there was absolutely no space. I continued, my voice echoing powerfully in the small kitchen. In a massive house that you bought using money stolen directly from me. You used my son's future college fund. You used my financial security to buy your lazy golden child a sports car. Joshua, please. I'm your father. There will be no payment plan, Robert, I said, cementing the steel boundary once and for all. You have exactly 87 days left to pay the full $585,000. If you are even one day late, Anthony will file a hard lien on your house, and the county sheriff will auction it off from right under you. Do not ever call this number again. I pressed end call. I permanently blocked the number. I put the phone face down on the counter. My hands weren't shaking anymore. My heart wasn't racing. For the very first time in 34 years, the heavy, suffocating, toxic weight of seeking my father's approval was completely gone. I was finally free. The spectacular collapse of their fake empire happened publicly, rapidly, and brutally. Catherine's incredibly active Facebook page, once a daily, annoying stream of luxury vacations and passive-aggressive quotes, went entirely embarrassingly silent. Aunt Clara and Uncle David, who had loudly called me a disgrace just weeks ago, suddenly had absolutely nothing to say when the highly public court records showing the felony forgery hit the local community news blog. They frantically tried to refinance their massive mortgage, but with the impending, highly publicized criminal charges, absolutely no bank would touch Robert with a 10-foot pole. At exactly day 45 of the 90-day window, the glaring for sale sign went up on their massive, perfectly manicured suburban lawn. Because they were incredibly desperate for a lightning-fast cash sale to satisfy the massive court judgment before the deadline expired, they had to list the beautiful house for hundreds of thousands of dollars significantly below market value. They completely lost all their equity. They lost their country club status. I drove by the large house exactly once after the sale. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon. A large, loud tow truck was backed aggressively into the driveway. I parked quietly across the street and watched in absolute silence as the operator hooked heavy chains up to Julian's gleaming silver Porsche and dragged it unceremoniously onto the flatbed. Julian was standing helplessly on the lawn in the rain, yelling furiously into his cell phone, looking utterly defeated and small. Catherine was struggling to carry cheap cardboard boxes out to a rented, dirty U-Haul truck. She looked incredibly haggard, her expensive designer clothes completely replaced by baggy gray sweatpants. I watched them struggle for about 5 minutes. I didn't feel a single ounce of pity. I didn't feel malicious joy either. I just felt a profound, heavy sense of permanent closure. The universe had finally, forcefully balanced the scales. I put my car in gear and drove away toward the hospital for my shift. I had a beautiful new life to build with my son, and I wasn't going to waste another single second looking in the rearview mirror at people who never truly loved me. It took exactly 86 days for the money to finally clear. I remember the exact moment it happened. I was sitting in the cramped break room at the hospital, wearing my standard blue scrubs, eating a cold turkey sandwich out of a plastic container. My phone buzzed on the cheap laminate table. It was an automated email notification from my bank. I unlocked my screen and opened the banking app. The little loading circle spun for 2 seconds, and then the numbers appeared on the screen. Available balance, $585,412. I didn't cheer. I didn't jump up and down. I just stared at the glowing screen until my vision blurred with tears. This wasn't just money. This was my grandmother's love. This was my mother's legacy. This was my son's entire future. His college fund, his safety, securely locked away from the greedy hands of a man who had tried to erase us. I transferred a large portion of it into a high-yield savings account for Isaac immediately. Then, I called my lawyer, Anthony, to thank him for saving my life. He just laughed his deep, booming laugh and told me to go buy a house. So that is exactly what I did. I didn't want a massive, echoing mansion in the wealthy suburbs like Robert's house. I wanted a home. I spent 3 weeks looking at properties until I drove down a quiet, tree-lined street called Maplewood Lane, just 2 miles from the hospital and 3 blocks from a highly rated elementary school. It was a modest, beautiful 2-bedroom craftsman cottage built in the late 1990s. It had a small, fenced-in backyard with a sprawling oak tree, a wide front porch perfect for sitting out in the evenings, and a bright, open kitchen with real granite counter space. The moment I walked through the front door, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The floors didn't creak. The walls felt incredibly solid. I put in a cash offer that same afternoon, and within 30 days, the keys were resting heavily in the palm of my hand. The very first Saturday after we officially moved our boxes into the new house, I left Isaac inside eating cereal and walked out to the driveway with a large tarp, a roll of painter's tape, and a heavy gallon of premium exterior paint. I spent 3 hours meticulously taping the edges and applying 2 thick, even coats of paint to the wooden front door. When it was finally dry, I called Isaac out to the front yard. He walked out in his socks, holding his stuffed bear, Biscuit, by the ear. He stopped in the middle of the driveway and just stared at the house. His mouth fell open slightly. I had painted the front door a vibrant, brilliant shade of cherry red. I walked over and knelt down next to him on the concrete. "Do you recognize it, buddy?" Isaac looked at the house, then looked at me, his eyes wide with absolute wonder. "It's the door from my drawing. The one I made at Uncle Carter's house." "You designed it, Isaac?" I told him, wrapping my arm tightly around his small shoulders. "You drew it on paper and I just made it real. This is our house. Nobody can ever kick us out of this one. We have all the space in the world right here." He threw his little arms around my neck and hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. That single hug was worth every single moment of pain, every grueling night shift, every second of anxiety I had endured over the last 34 years. 2 months after we settled into the house on Maplewood Lane, the cold winter began to thaw into a beautiful California spring. That was when Grandma Martha officially moved back to Sacramento. She completely packed up her small apartment at the retirement village in Tucson, hired a moving company, and bought a one-way ticket on Southwest Airlines. I drove to the airport to pick her up. When I saw her walking through the arrival terminal, pulling a small floral suitcase behind her, she looked exactly the same as she did in my childhood memories. She wore sensible orthopedic shoes, a neatly pressed cardigan, and carried a spine that might as well have been forged from solid steel. She had survived burying her own daughter, and she had survived 22 years of cruel lies. She was unbreakable. I walked up to her and she dropped her suitcase handle. She wrapped her arms around me, burying her face in my shoulder. For a few profound seconds, standing there in the middle of a crowded airport terminal, I wasn't a 34-year-old ER nurse or a tired single father. I was just an 8-year-old boy again, standing in a lavender-scented kitchen, fully enveloped in absolute, unconditional love. I helped her move into a beautiful, sunlit first-floor condo exactly 10 minutes away from our new house. It was close enough that she could comfortably walk over when the weather was nice. And from that week forward, our lives fundamentally transformed. Every single Saturday morning became a sacred ritual. Martha would walk over to our house by 8 o'clock. The moment she stepped through the red front door, the entire house would fill with the rich, incredible smell of melting butter, vanilla extract, and warm cornbread. She bought Isaac a small canvas apron, and the two of them would stand at the kitchen counter for hours. She patiently taught my 5-year-old son how to crack eggs without dropping the sharp shells into the glass bowl. She showed him how to measure flour. While they baked, Martha would hum the exact same quiet, beautiful church hymns she used to sing to me when I was a child. I would sit at the kitchen island, drinking a hot cup of black coffee, just watching them. The sound of Isaac giggling loudly because he got flour on his nose, mixed with Martha's warm, rich laughter, filled the house perfectly. That specific kind of laughter fills a home naturally, effortlessly, without ever asking for permission, simply because it inherently belongs there. I finally had a village. I was no longer fighting the world entirely alone. One sunny afternoon, the three of us went to the local garden center. We bought 10 small lavender bushes and bags of rich potting soil. We spent the entire day kneeling in the dirt along the front concrete walkway of the house, planting the bushes in a neat row. It was an exact replica of the walkway at her old house on Burwood Street, the house Robert had stolen, but the memory he could never erase. Isaac took his vital job as the chief waterer very seriously. Every evening after dinner, he would take his small green plastic watering can, tuck his bear under his arm, and carefully water each individual plant. He would talk to the lavender bushes quietly, telling them about his day at kindergarten, treating them like old friends. Standing on the porch watching him, I realized that we hadn't just built a house. We had successfully built a fortress of love. The deep peace we had cultivated was rarely interrupted, but about 6 months after the court ruling, I received an unexpected text message from Aunt Clara. It was a long, rambling message apologizing for the horrible things she had said to me during the lawsuit. She said she had finally seen the undeniable legal proof of Robert's felony forgery and Catherine's toxic manipulation. She asked if she could come by and see me. My initial instinct was to aggressively block her number. I had no desire to reopen closed doors, but a small part of me wanted to hear exactly what the fallout looked like from the inside. I agreed to meet her, but I set a firm boundary. She could not come inside the house. We would sit on the front porch. Clara arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. She looked like she had aged 10 years. Her posture was slumped, and she nervously clutched her purse. I handed her a cup of coffee, and we sat in the wooden rocking chairs on the porch, looking out at the blooming lavender. She spent the first 20 minutes apologizing profusely. She told me the brutal reality of Robert and Catherine's new life. After their massive suburban house was auctioned off to pay the judgment, they were forced to rent a tiny, cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a highly undesirable neighborhood near the highway. Robert had been quietly let go from his prestigious corporate job due to the pending criminal fraud investigation. He was currently working a mid-level administrative job just to make rent. Catherine had lost all her wealthy country club friends the moment the money vanished. And Julian, the golden child who had his Porsche repossessed, was now entirely cut off. Without Robert's stolen money to fund his lifestyle, Julian was forced to get a minimum wage job working the cash register at a local electronics store. I listened to all of this with complete emotional detachment. It didn't bring me joy. It was just the natural, unavoidable consequence of their own malicious actions. But then, Clara set her coffee cup down and looked at me with profound sadness in her eyes. "Joshua, I need to tell you something else. Something I should have told you decades ago. I need you to know why Robert treated you the way he did. Why he always favored Julian so aggressively." I looked at her, my guard instantly going up. He favored Julian because Julian is Catherine's son. Because I was the leftover baggage from his first marriage. "No," Clara said softly, shaking her head. "It goes much deeper than that. It was about your mother. You see, Robert is a narcissist. He needs absolute control over everyone around him. He needs total submission. Your mother was the only person in his entire life who ever truly stood up to him. When she filed for divorce, she didn't just leave him. She publicly exposed his financial lies, his emotional abuse, his complete lack of empathy. She humiliated his ego." Clara reached out and gently touched my arm. "When your mother died in that accident, Robert took custody of you. But every single day, as you grew up, you looked more and more like her. You have her exact eyes, Joshua. You have her quiet resilience. You have her stubborn independence. You never begged him for attention. You worked 3 jobs to pay for your nursing degree instead of bowing down to him. Every time Robert looked at you, he didn't see a son to love. He saw the one woman who had completely defeated him. He saw his own absolute loss of control." I sat frozen in the rocking chair. The wind rustled the oak tree in the front yard. "Julian is weak," Clara continued, her voice barely a whisper. "Julian relies entirely on Robert's money. Julian feeds Robert's massive ego. But you never needed him. That terrified him. He didn't steal that trust fund just to buy a sports car. He stole it to systematically break you. He wanted to force you into a position where you would have to crawl back to him and beg for his financial help. He wanted to finally break your mother's spirit by breaking yours. A heavy, profound silence settled over the porch. The final, hidden puzzle piece of my painful childhood finally clicked perfectly into place. It was never about me being inherently unlovable. It was never about me not being smart enough or successful enough or good enough. It was about my strength. My independence was a direct, glaring threat to his fragile ego. I looked at Clara, took a deep breath of the lavender-scented air, and smiled a genuinely peaceful smile. Well, Clara, he failed. He completely, spectacularly failed. I think a lot about silence these days. Before the devastating earthquake destroyed our cramped apartment, I used to be terrified of silence. In my childhood home with Robert and Catherine, silence was never actually peaceful. It was heavy. It was a terrifying weapon. It was the tense, suffocating quiet right before Robert would explode in a fit of rage over a misplaced television remote or a scuff mark on his pristine hardwood floors. I spent my entire youth walking on eggshells, desperately trying to shrink my physical footprint, terrified that making a single sound would draw his cruel attention. Even when I became an adult and moved into my own apartment, the silence felt deeply anxious. It was the silence of a single father staring at a stack of overdue utility bills late at night, wondering if the next paycheck would cover the rising cost of groceries. It was the silence of pure survival mode. But the silence in this new house on Maplewood Lane sounds entirely different. It is a late Sunday evening as I tell you this story. The neighborhood is completely asleep. The dishwasher is running a quiet cycle in the kitchen. Outside my window, the street lamps cast a soft, warm glow over the quiet road. I just walked down the hallway to check on Isaac. He is fast asleep in his bedroom. The small, star-shaped nightlight casts a gentle blue light across his walls. Biscuit the bear is tucked securely under his chin. His chest rises and falls in a steady, perfect rhythm. I stood in his doorway for a long time, just watching him breathe. I realized that my own body felt fundamentally different. My shoulders weren't perpetually hunched up near my ears anymore. My jaw wasn't rigidly clenched. The constant, low-level hum of protective adrenaline that I had carried in my bloodstream for 34 years was completely gone. This silence doesn't sound like fear. It doesn't sound like a looming threat. It sounds like absolute peace. It sounds like safety. It sounds like the incredibly solid foundation of a home that cannot be shaken by manipulative words, cannot be stolen by forged signatures, and cannot be destroyed by the people who were supposed to protect us. We are safe here. Truly, finally safe. I didn't share this deeply personal, painful journey with you just to expose the crimes of a corrupt, narcissistic father. I shared this story because I know with absolute certainty that there are people listening to this right now who are living the exact same nightmare I lived for decades. Maybe you are the family scapegoat. Maybe you are the one who is constantly labeled too sensitive, too difficult, or too demanding simply because you dare to ask for basic respect. Maybe you have spent your entire life bending over backwards, sacrificing your own mental health, and twisting yourself into smaller and smaller shapes just to comfortably fit at a family dining table where your chair was never truly meant to exist. If that sounds incredibly familiar, I need you to hear me clearly right now. When you live in a toxic environment long enough, you start to deeply internalize the lies. You start to fundamentally believe that true love is something that must be desperately earned through perfect obedience and total silence. You convince yourself that if you just work a little harder, if you just agree a little more, if you just ignore the glaring hypocrisy, they will finally look at you and love you the way you deserve to be loved. But love doesn't work that way. True family doesn't work that way. The moment Robert looked down at my innocent 5-year-old son in that dark driveway and told him there was no space for him in a massive 4-bedroom house, the dangerous illusion shattered forever. Because no child, and no adult, should ever grow up believing that they have to make themselves incredibly small just to be worthy of love. When someone looks you directly in the eye and tells you that there is no space for you, the answer is never to aggressively shrink yourself until you finally fit their narrow requirements. The answer is to aggressively investigate who has been selfishly taking up your rightful space all along. If your family ever made you feel like you were simply too much, I promise you, you weren't. You were simply living in a house that was entirely too small for the truth. Sometimes, the most terrifying, bravest thing you can possibly do in your life is to finally stop apologizing for existing. Sometimes, ultimate justice isn't loud, dramatic, or cinematic. Sometimes, justice is simply choosing your own dignity, fiercely protecting the innocent people you love, and building your own beautiful home where no one ever has to ask if there is enough room for them again. I look back at the chaotic legal battles, the painful custody of my own self-worth, and the ultimate victory in that courtroom, and I realize the most valuable inheritance I received wasn't the massive check from the bank. The true inheritance was the absolute realization of my own unbreakable strength. The money bought the physical house with the red door, but my courage bought the peace that lives inside it. We often talk about breaking generational curses, but we rarely discuss how incredibly painful that breaking process actually is. It requires you to look the people who raised you directly in the eye and hold them strictly accountable. It requires you to mourn the loving parents you desperately deserved but never actually had. But once you walk through that intense fire, the freedom on the other side is unimaginably beautiful. You get to become the architect of a brand new legacy. I get to be the father to Isaac that Robert never was to me. I get to ensure that the toxic cycle stops firmly with me. As we close this chapter together, I want to leave you with a profound thought. True family is not determined merely by shared blood or a common last name. True family is determined by consistent respect, unwavering loyalty, and the absolute safety you feel when you walk through their front door. I would love to know how this story impacted you. What is the most important lesson you are taking away from my journey today? Please share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If you have ever had to boldly stand up to toxic family members or rebuild your life from absolute scratch, tell me your story. I read every single comment. Or, if this story simply brought you a sense of validation and hope, just leave the word "good" in the comments, so I know you appreciate the deep lessons this journey has provided. Your engagement helps this video reach someone else out there who might be sitting in the dark, desperately needing to hear that they are not alone. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. Keep standing tall, never let anyone steal your rightful space, and take care of yourselves. I will see you in the next story.